Can you tell us a little more about the Guru? I believe it was Manaval Munigal, right?
The saint who gave him the name Prativadi Bhayankaranna is different from.
So, when exactly was this prayer written? How old is it?
Well, you cannot state the date with certainty, and I have also not.
Just walk us through how the magic of MS Amma's voice of this prayer happened, and also why you taglined your book thus.
Really, I'm not qualified to talk about MS Amma. You all know she's a genius.
Have there been places where you have heard this, like where you didn't expect to hear and you heard this prayer?
Oh yeah. In in the early 90s, I used to be based in Rajasthan. One of my jobs. Okay. And once I was.
So you mentioned about this guru of this great saint and poet. Can you tell us a little more about the guru? I believe it was Manaval Munigal, right?
No, so the saint who gave him the name Prativadi Bhayankaranna is different from Manaval Munigal.
Okay.
After he grew to adulthood, Anna became a disciple of Manaval Muni. Who was himself a very famous and a great saint and a reformer of that period. Yeah, so there were two different people.
Okay. Wow. So when exactly was this prayer written? How old is it? And also one of the first things that come to our mind is when we tell Venkatesha Suprabatham is the Tirumala Tirupati temple. So when did this temple adopt this as their morning prayer ritual?
Well, you cannot state the date with certainty, and I've also not stated the date with certainty. But how I've tried to arrive at it was try to triangulate the various events which took place in Anna's life. As I mentioned, Anna became a disciple of Manaval Munigal very late in his life. He was an adult. He was already called Anna by then. He got that appellation when he was a teenager. He was he was given that by a guru called Kumara Nayanacharya, and later on, when he came to adulthood, he heard about Manaval Munigal and became his disciple. And once Manaval Munigal went to Tirumala, and there he found that the morning prayer which was being sung was the one which is traditionally sung in the Ranganath Swami temple in Sri Lanka. So he asked Anna to compose one specifically for Venkateshwara. Okay, so this is the general traditional belief. And this is the accepted belief, and that's what I have used to try to triangulate a date. So then it was a question of going through the life of Manaval Munigal, and also to go through the biography of Anna that Professor Ramanujam has written, to get an estimate of when they could have possibly gone to Tirumala together.
Okay,
so that's how I've broadly tried it. And my estimate is, depending on a lot of research material I read on the life of Manaval Munigal and also on Anna, I estimated between 1420 and 1430 is my estimate.
Okay.
And of course, if somebody finds different material and is able to shed light, I'll be grateful for clarity. But yeah, that's my estimate. And I think in another decade or two afterwards, this must have become more popular.
Okay.
Because there are some inscriptional references, not to the Suprabatham itself, but to morning prayers becoming more and more prominent. And there is the pioneering epigraphist of the Tirupati Tirumala Devasthanam, a gentleman called Sadhu Subramanya Shastri. It's his contention that it was probably the Suprabatham.
Oh, okay.
A lot of my work was made easy because the Tirumala Tirupati temple have been studied extensively for the last 100 years by some of the greatest scholars of the land history. So there is a lot of material available.
Okay.
I used all of these to put together my estimates, but these are just estimates of an amateur.
Okay, so you're saying 15th century, and if I'm right, Annamacharya was also, was living around the same period, and he is very popularly associated with the Tirumala temple and Lord Venkateshwara Swami. So, what was his family's association with this prayer?
So the Talapaka family, which is Annamacharya's family, were given the hereditary rights to recite all the prayers in front of
Right.
Lord Venkateshwara. And Talapaka Annamacharya is probably the greatest composer of religious literature of all time. The estimate is at least 32,000 Sankirtanas.
Right.
Which, given his lifespan and assuming that he started composing at the age of 16 or 17, is like one Sankirtana a day. So I don't think anybody else in the world has got this kind of a corpus. It is also said that his son, which is Pedda Tirumalachar, was an equally great composer, and who also continued. I mean, his father told him, you also keep continuing, so apparently he also did so. Now, a part of the corpus has been discovered, and it's the story of that discovery of that corpus itself is a phenomenal. It's a very fascinating story. So the family had the rights, and they must have, this is all, we can today only try to join the dots.
Correct.
They would have been reciting the Suprabatham, and they continued reciting actually up to definitely 1805, where there is a mention by the East India Company that the Talapaka family were reciting the Suprabatham in Tirumala. Yes. So assume that they got the rights in the mid 15th century. And we know there is a record by an English guy that the Talapakas were doing this. So at least 300 odd years. So that's a tremendous service. And it continues. I mean, they had rights even in this century. So,
okay, even today they have
I don't know about, look, so they had the rights this century also. They probably still do. I mean, so I don't know now. Maybe they do. But till recent times they had.
Okay.
So it's a tremendous service. And Pedda Tirumalachar himself was a very famous, very great scholar and poet. And for a few generations after Talapaka Annamacharya, his descendants were all great poet saints.
Oh, okay.
And Pedda Tirumalachar has composed a Suprabatham in Telugu also.
Oh.
Yes. And this is being discovered in 1946 itself.
Lovely. Okay. Interesting. That's
so their family is they're very closely associated with all these things.
Oh, lovely.
And there are people who spend their lives exploring that family and bringing it, the story of discovery of Annamacharya Sankirtana itself is a great story.
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, 32,000 is not a small number.
No, I don't think all 32,000 have been discovered.
Right.
But whatever was discovered were discovered in these copper plates, which are in a hidden room in Tirumala by a very famous scholar called Veturi Prabhakara Shastri.
Okay.
He discovered them, I think 1910, 1920, I forget then. And he started the process of, till then everybody knew the poem. I mean, everybody was singing it every day. All these centuries, everybody was singing the Sankirtana, but nobody could, put two and two together. So the gentleman did all that and then continued, and they also had a family tradition. His son is still alive, he's 93 years old. And his son did a PhD thesis on the Talapaka poets, Professor Veturi Anandamurthy.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so I got all these stories from him.
How lovely. I'm actually feeling very jealous of you that, you could meet and speak to these, to these greats and get first-hand information on all this. Amazing. This is, I'm so happy that you're sharing it again. I know I've said this before, but I'm beyond thrilled that, we are having this conversation now. So when I typically say Venkatesha Suprabatham, there are two things that come to most people's mind. One is the Tirumala Tirupati, which we spoke about. The second is M.S. Subbulakshmi Amma. Her booming voice, her stature really added that extra flavor to this whole prayer. And I know you have also talked to her descendants while you wrote your book. Can you tell us, how this whole magic of Venkatesha Suprabatham in her booming voice happened, and how this whole thing of the whole country started to listen to this. It became a very devotional thing. And you had mentioned this, you have taglined your book as the most popular prayer as well. So just walk us through how the magic of MS Amma's voice of this prayer happened, and also why you taglined your book thus.
So, I really am not qualified to talk about MS Amma. You all know she's a genius, but along with genius, there came a lot of hard work. From what I gather, and I spoke to, as you said, people who are related to her, who were very kind. They went out of their way to kind of talk to me and tell me stuff. She practiced very hard. 8 to 9 months, hard work.
Just for this?
Yes.
For 9 months for
8
just
to 9
learning.
months.
Wow.
She practiced very hard. She wanted to get it right. She practiced very hard.
Wow.
And the first recording of the Venkatesha Suprabatham was actually made by the gentleman who was the reciter of the hymn of the prayer in Tirumala, was somebody called P.V. Ananthasayanam. He did the first recording for HME in the 50s. Okay. In the late 50s, All India Radio wanted to kind of, popularize classical music, and they wanted the best and brightest classical artists in India to popularize classical music, and MS Amma was, even by then, considered, and rightly, the best and brightest. So they requested her to do this, and P.V. Ananthasayanam was deputed by the Tirumala authorities to go and sit with her and train her, which he did. And then she practiced very hard, and they went in for a recording, and apparently they got it right. Even HMV took a lot of pains. So the recording actually started, and they started doing the radio broadcast in 1958 itself. Okay, and then it became very popular, and people started hearing it, and it went as far as, even in Pune in 61, 62, and I've spoken to people who heard it then as kids. So HMV decided they should bring out a recording. So she went, and they flew in their sound engineer, the chief of sound engineering from Calcutta, was a gentleman called, I think, Mr. Sen. And she did the recording, and she got it right in the first take. So it's flawless. So they still did a second take to, as a backup, but it wasn't required.
Wow.
It was first time right. It was extraordinary. It never happens.
How genius. Wow. This is so fascinating to hear. And such a person spending 9 months to, get it so right, that is something. It's so inspirational to even hear about that story. So talking about Venkatesha Suprabatham as the most popular prayer, how did you come up with that tagline, and why do you think it is the most popular?
Well, look, so it was for a long time. It is one of the, anecdotally, I don't know the numbers, obviously. It's one of the highest selling recordings in Indian gramophone history.
Oh, okay.
It is probably, and I don't have numbers to back this, but anecdotally, it is the highest non-film recording. But that's not the point. The point is, when we were figuring out what to call this book, I went with a friend of mine a friend of mine was visiting me, and he's a very seasoned writer and journalist himself. And I told him what I was doing, and so though he's also half Tamil, he hadn't heard of it. Like me, he's brought up in Delhi. So he said, "Are you sure it's a famous?" I said, "Yeah, look, it's very popular." So I said, "Okay." And we went for coffee to a coffee shop in Jayanagar. It's a very large coffee shop, MTR, new MTR, Mayya's in Jayanagar.
Right.
First floor. If you've been there, it's a large hall.
Right.
He said, "Look, so if I ask people here, will they know?" I said, "Yeah." So he went table to table asking people if you've heard of the Suprabatham. Everybody had. And what zapped him was one guy just started singing it. So more than popular, I think this could be the best loved.
That's a very interesting story. So on that note, Have there been places where you have heard this, like where you didn't expect to hear and you heard this prayer?
Oh yeah. I mean, in the early 90s, I used to be based in Rajasthan. One of my jobs. Okay. And once it was a traveling job. So I used to go from one place to another as a part of my role. And I was going from a city called Bikaner, a city called Ganganagar. And the road is a long straight road which goes through the desert. Okay. I mean, it's a night long, and there is a small dhaba somewhere in the middle of the road. It's very small. It's not even a village. I mean, the name is immaterial, but it's called Loon Karansar. Okay, so I mean, early in the morning at 5 o'clock, our car stopped there, and I got out of it, and there was a Tamil Nadu registration truck in which the Suprabatham was being played at 5 o'clock in the morning. So
oh wow!
I mean, the least expected. I mean, you don't expect it in the middle of the desert. I mean, and Loon Karansar is pretty close to the Pakistan border, so you got lots of army and stuff like that. So yeah.
My goodness, that definitely makes for a wonderful story. So, we are coming to the end of the interview, but I have a few questions to ask before we wrap up this interview. A lot of us are very interested in history, especially when it comes to us in the form of stories. From your journey, can you share with us what we should be aware of when we are going on this search? Because there's just a ton of information. How do we figure out what's right, what's wrong? What is that piece of advice, or how would you share your experience of chasing something down in the past?
It's really the function of what kind of question you want to ask. So maybe a certain set of questions are being asked all this while, and you want to ask a new question, a different question. I mean, you have a different question in your mind. So really, there is no right or wrong. It is a question of, it is what kind of questions you're interested in. Really, so it's for each individual to figure that out for themselves. There is no prescription. More important than that is, of course, your intent. And the intent is also going to determine whether a quest like this is going to make you more peaceful or less peaceful. So if your intent is to look at positive aspects, and if you are not seeking to scratch old wounds, then you may end up you'll have one kind of feeling. But you could have another feeling, but there is no right or wrong. You could do both. It's up to you. It is really up to the kind of questions you're interested in. So each journey beyond a point is a completely individual journey. It's up to the individual. You try to be balanced. You try to see both points of view. Because for every question, in the past, there would have been two different types of answers. So do your best to look at both sides of every question. To the extent possible, when it's difficult, be evidence-based. Try to be factual to the extent possible. And to the extent possible, try to tread the middle path. That's what I'm not prescribing this. Okay, this is what I try to do.
Right, that's what you did.
But for every individual should find their own path and should find their own questions. And each individual's intent and objective will be different. So I think we should all accept that. There's no prescription, there's no right or wrong path.
Right. Very beautifully said. So you had amazing stories to tell us, and there's just so much to know about just one prayer. We can even go on to talk about the science behind it and what have you there. But what is captivating your interest currently? What are you working on?
Well, the thing is, in the general broad stream of history in India, the history of South India generally gets the short shrift. That's largely because it's distant from the current centers, mental or physical centers of Indian history, mainstream of Indian history. So I think, I'm fascinated always by topics in South Indian history. I'm a South Indian myself. I think each one of us, if you're interested in history, should look at your own personal area, personal geography, and Bangalore is so fascinating. I mean, South India is so fascinating. So yeah, I mean, currently those are the themes I'm looking at, and since I'm not a great Sanskrit scholar, I mean, I'm just a student. I'd like to spend some more time in improving my language before I do any further dives into that world. So whatever I'm currently doing is all themes around just before the time the British came. This was just at the dawn of the colonial era. There's lots of material available in English there. So you can just read the East India Company records, that's all in English. You don't have to have linguistic forays.
Right.
You don't have to, so for the Suprabatham, I had to learn a bit, a new script called Grantha script, which is what most of the Sanskrit manuscripts in South India are written.
Okay.
You don't have to do all this. So because if you have to kind of read Sanskrit manuscripts or if you have to do a foray into unpublished material, you have to learn new scripts. It's not so difficult if you do recent history. I mean, so at the moment I'm taking the easy way out. I mean, it's still, I mean, it involves a lot of reading, but it's not, there's no linguistic, parallel linguistic journey also.
Right. Interesting. So hopefully we will hear from you soon on, your findings or, fascinating things that you have. You've had the pleasure of going through. So thank you so much for coming on this show and spending so much time with us and talking to us about the history of a prayer. Who would have thought? So thank you so much. And your stories were so amazing and very inspiring. Thank you so much for educating our children and sharing your experiences. We will talk again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.